Call recording is on. All right. So hopefully this doesn't crash my computer again. I was going to record via OBS, but that crashed it before. So I think I'm just going to keep it within Join Me and hope that that works. So I'm hoping this will be useful for people just getting started in Vim, as well as people who have some experience or some people who have a lot of experience. So if I say something and it doesn't make sense, feel free to interject, whether that's on Slack or via voice on here. And I'll try to clear things up. But I'll start slow. I'll start with a little history lesson, and then we can jump into it. So first thing I wanted to check is, so can you see my screen, and can you read the text in the terminal?
Looks great.
Excellent. All right. So I'm going to be talking about Vim. Vim is an editor that is based on VI, which is itself an editor that's based on the editor EX, which itself was based on ED, which was itself based on QED, which basically starts at the beginning of computing, the beginning of whenever somebody had a terminal. We'll unlock the meeting. There we go. So Ed was known as, I think it was described as a hostile editor. It was not a terribly pleasant experience, made only slightly better by EX. So we'll jump into all right, so let's jump into here. So if we go into one of these, if we go into the .files repo, there's nothing there. Okay, so this is Vim. You can actually see the code. You can see lines that are in there. If we were to open this in EX, we don't actually see anything. This is back when computers were just, you sat down at a terminal and you had to access your computer mainframe, and you're sending data back and forth, and it's super slow communication. You didn't necessarily want your screen, or you didn't even necessarily have the capability of having your screen keep consistent with whatever you're supposedly viewing in your editor. So what X lets you do is it lets you look at individual lines. So you can say, I want one line, and you can see that. I can give it a range, so I can give it 3 lines. So from line 1 to line 3, give me that line. Or I could also say print, so P for print. And this was a huge step forward over what they could do before, where you basically had to code everything line by line without being able to see it. Now you could at least get it back. You didn't have to do everything in sequential order. You could go to a line and you could insert things. So I could say, go to line 2 and insert. And so now I'm just going to print the whole document. So I told it to go to line 2 and insert, and then I put in my text, and now I can see the output of that. Because you can imagine this was very cumbersome to do, especially if you're trying to keep some very complicated code in mind. So it's obvious that having a visual interface to this where you can actually see and interact with the code would be useful. So somebody came up with a visual interface. So I'm in X right now, and if I give it the command VI or visual, that now brings me into visual mode in X. So this lets me go and actually move my cursor around, and I can change things, and I can do things. And before I forget, again, I'll put screen key on so that people can see the keys that I'm pressing, because that will also be helpful for Vim. So Vim and X are very tightly coupled. So you have this visual interface where you can do things and you can interact with your text, but then you have this whole backend underpinning it where you can give it commands that operate on ranges and do things, and the two of those together become quite powerful. So I'm just going to leave this, and I'll go back into it in Vim proper. So as Joe and I were also talking about before, VI is often aliased to something else or symlinked to something else on your system. If VI is symlinked to EX, it'll start in Vi, which is a very stripped down editor. Whereas if it's symlinked to Vim, then you get all of the Vim goodness with the plugins and the syntax highlighting and all that. So if you ever go into VI and it's not looking how you expect it to, make sure that your VI is symlinked to Vim. So if I open it up in Vim, I now have a little bit more syntax highlighting because this is a bash script. You can color codes the flags and all that. So we'll come over here into the TensorFlow project. So I know there are some mixed feelings about Python in here, but I enjoy Python. I'll give you some demos in here. If you'd like me to demo on a different package that I can clone from GitHub, feel free to send that in the Slack and I can do that. But we'll go into just this configure script because we can do some things, some interesting things in here. So the first thing that's important to note about Vim, and I guess this is more kind of a philosophical thing about text editing. You're not, so I would like you to think about Vim almost as if it's some kind of language. So it has these different pieces to it, these different components that you can use in different contexts. And you have to learn a basic vocabulary. But then once you learn that vocabulary, you can put them together in all sorts of just crazy useful ways. So the first thing to understand is the idea of modes in Vim. So this is probably the most, or one of the most different things from most other editors, is that in most other editors, if you open a file and you start hitting keys, you're going to start typing those characters into your editor. That is not the case with Vim. So if I start typing J's and K's and L's and H's, that's moving the cursor around. It's not actually typing any characters. So when you first open Vim, and in fact, what you're probably going to spend most of your time in is called normal mode. So in normal mode, all of the keys on your keyboard are basically hotkeys. So rather than you being in Visual Studio, VS Code, or Sublime, where hitting a character will type that character, but you can use Control or Alt to modify that. Normal mode assumes you're going to spend most of your time here, so we might as well give you direct access to most of the things that you're going to want to do. You can instead go into insert mode, and insert mode, as the name suggests, allows you to insert text. So if we're down here, I can go into insert mode. So I won't go into the specific keys right now, but now as I type, well, that was a bad example. As I type my characters, is actually putting those into my document. Escape is probably one of the most valuable keys that you can have because that gets you out of insert mode and back into normal mode. So now I can go back to my J's and my K's and everything else, and I'm back in normal mode where I can just move around. So the first thing most people want to do is insert text. So if you open a file, if you open a blank file, there's nothing to do in there, you might just want to start typing your text. So in Vim, there are several ways to get into insert mode. As you get more experienced, they become just muscle memory how to get into them, and you'll see why they're useful. So where my cursor is important. So if I'm here at future and I hit I, this will bring me into insert mode, but it'll bring me into insert mode on the left side of my cursor, so right before my cursor. So let me jump over to import. So if I'm at import, if I start typing, that now goes before the cursor. If instead I type A, that will then put me into insert mode after the cursor. So I is kind of for insert, A is for append. On the single character level, it doesn't make that much of a difference because you could move over one character and then go into insert mode. But one of the really nice things with Vim is that most commands that have a lowercase version also have an uppercase version that does that thing, but more. So whereas lowercase I brought me into insert mode right before my cursor, uppercase I will bring me into insert mode at the beginning of the line, because that is often something that you'll want to do. So again, I'm over here by the import. If I do capital I, that'll jump me to the beginning of the line, and then I can throw in a comment or something if I want there to comment out the line. So regardless of where I am in that line, I will bring me to the beginning in insert mode. I can do the same thing. So whereas lowercase a brought me into insert mode after my cursor, if I do that with a capital A, I will then append to the end of the line. So then I can just jump straight here and add my comment over there. So that idea of a lowercase version doing something, some kind of behavior, and then the uppercase one just doing that more is a repeating feature of the language. And also, for some of the actions, repeating a character, so hitting a character twice will do something. So these will be important for things that change some of the text. So again, with the idea that a lot of what you're doing is not necessarily just going to be purely typing text in. A lot of the commands are for moving text around or deleting things or changing things. So D is a very common command that you're going to want to run. D deletes things. So unlike with the insert commands, you have to tell it what you want to delete. So I think most people are probably familiar with, if you're in your text editor and you hit the backspace key, that will delete a character. Or if you hit the delete key, that'll delete characters in the other direction. Vim can do that. So if I type capital X, that'll delete one character back. And if I do X, that will delete one character forward. But there are much more useful ways of deleting things. So there are probably some cases where you've transposed two letters and you just want to delete one of the characters and type another character in. But a lot of times you want to delete a whole word or a whole line or do something with that. So what Vim has is this idea of actions and motions. So the motions, like you saw before, J and K go up and down, H and L go left and right, and for some reason that's not coming up on screen key. 0 will jump you to the beginning of the line, $sign will jump you to the end. These are all things that you'll just kind of pick up as you go along. So they're useful for moving around. You can jump through words with B for back, W for word. And then you can combine these things with the actions. For example, if I do D, W, I will delete the word that I'm in. So technically, I will delete through whatever motion W does. So if I'm here at the beginning of the word and I do W, that will wrap me around to the next line. So I'm deleting this whole thing. If I do DW from the middle of this, it's going to leave what was in front of the cursor because it's just saying from this point, delete this word motion. So you have motions. I can D down, which then says delete this line and the one below it. DB will delete backwards. DD just deletes the whole line. And if I go back here, a capital D will delete from where you currently are through the end of the line. So like I mentioned before, you have some kind of action. So D takes a motion. So that can be words or paragraphs or blocks. It can be whatever you want. So it can delete that thing. D twice will delete that whole line. And capital D will delete from where you are through the end of the line. So that whole notion of combining the actions and the motions also applies to other actions. So D will delete, C changes. So if I do CW, that changes the word. So I'm changing that current word, which means that I'm deleting it and going into insert mode. So if I wanted to change import to my import, I can just change that whole thing without having to go to the end of the word, backspace to the beginning, and then type my word in. I can just go to it, and then with this one command, delete the word and start to change it. So another thing that's a very important concept is repeatability in Vim. So because I did that as one action, so I changed import into my import, I can then replay that action if I want with the period key. So if I go up to this one and I do dot, that will change the current word wherever I am to what I changed it to that previous time. So Vim remembers whatever your previous action was, and it allows you to replay it. So if I were to do DD to delete the line, I could then do that again with just a dot. So I don't have to hit D twice because 2 characters is way more than I want to do. I might as well just repeat it with 1 character, and then I can do that again. So I think a fundamental thing of importance in Vim is trying to be as frugal with your keystrokes as possible. So I don't know how many people have experienced repetitive strain injuries, but going back and forth between your keyboard and your mouse is not a great pattern. Because doing that motion, that back and forth, that does put a lot of stress on your wrists. So trying to do everything, I mean, one, without the mouse, but then in as few keystrokes as possible, I think it ends up being healthier, at least in my experience, I've found that. But then also, I think Vim helps you get your commands. It lets you do things on the screen at the pace that you kind of are thinking about them, and in a way that you might be thinking to yourself also. So for example, if I wanted to change division, so if I no longer want to import division, but I want to import something else, I can go to division and change that word, if I could type, to something else. So rather than me having to go take my mouse, go over here and select it and do something and then delete it, I can just go straight to where I want to go and then do the thing that I want to do. And getting the vocabulary in place really helps with doing that. And then, so you don't have to learn all the different combinations of things, because learning what the different possibilities are just unlocks the possibilities that you can, how you can combine them all. So I'm going to start going through some of the more advanced things, I think, just to show how some of these simple commands can have some really nice features. So another thing I should note is that I know some people get frustrated with the HJKL for motions, replacing the arrow keys. Ideally, you wouldn't really have to use the HJKL either, because those are for very fine-grained motions. So the larger motions you can do, the better. And so there are ways to just scroll down. So if you find yourself just holding a key down and waiting for the key repeat to kick in or hitting it a bunch of times, there's probably a better way to do that. And if you do want to learn Vim, so one thing is Vim Tutor. So if you just on your terminal type Vim Tutor, that will give you all of the motion commands and how to interact with things and a little bit about what Vim is and how to use it. Once you're past that stage, if you are using Vim and you want to learn more about things, there is just an amazing help system built in. So if you go to :help, you can then type the thing you want to learn about, and it's really good at directing you there. So I can type help motion, and this will jump me to the motion section. And there is more detail in here than you will ever be able to get through, but it details everything that Vim can do. So the help system is great in Vim. All right, so we'll do a little bit more with the actions combined with motions or text objects. So as I mentioned before, if you are doing a delete and you just give it a W, that will delete from wherever your cursor is through the end of the word. So that deleted up until what Vim determined was a word. And that can be defined by the syntax of your language. So sometimes dashes count in a word, sometimes they don't, they're treated as minus signs. So that Vim determines that based on the syntax of your language. But so for here, DW will delete the rest of the word. But if I want to delete the whole word, there's a text object where you can say, I want to delete in something or around something. So DI will delete inside, and I can give it the word. And that will delete not just from where I am to the end of the word, but it will delete the whole word. So regardless of my cursor position. I can do the same thing with, if you notice, I have on this line, I'm in a string, so I have single quotes around it. I can delete inside the quotes, so I can just nuke the whole string. I can delete around the quotes, so I can delete everything inside the string as well as the quotes. I can delete inside the square brackets, and this is all just using the same sort of syntax. I can delete in or around, and then some kind of motion. So you have words. I can tell it the delimiter I want to delete. So single quotes, double quotes, square brackets, curly brackets. If you're using a language, so if you have JavaScript, for example, and you have a whole lot of curly braces, this is very useful if you want to do something to everything that's inside those delimiters.
What was that specific command again?
So doing some kind of action and then an I or an A to do in or around. And so that just says whether it should include or not the delimiters that you're giving it, and then the delimiter itself. So if I want to delete everything inside the string, I would do DI, and then since it's bounded by single quotes, I can give it the single quote. But this not only applies to delete, this also applies to change and copy, which is called yank in Vim. So if instead of doing DI single quote, I did CI single quote, that deletes everything inside the string, but then also drops me directly into insert mode. So then I can start typing whatever I want inside insert mode, and then escape to get out of that. And then, going back to what I said before, if you do something as one atomic change, so changing something is one change, I can then replay that. So if I do dot, I now change everything that's inside these single quotes to whatever I changed it to before. So
that's huge. That's really helpful.
Yeah, so this applies to any kind of, maybe I shouldn't say any, most kinds of delimiters that you'll have. So single quotes, double quotes, square brackets, curly braces, parens. If you have some kind of delimiter, it will let you change inside that delimiter. You can also, depending on how your white space is, you can act based on that paragraphs. So for now, I'm going to go and I'm going to show you something else, which is visual mode, which is where, so in Vim, visual mode means something different than visual mode meant in X. So that's maybe a little confusing. But in Vim, if you type V, you can see now on the bottom, instead of being in insert mode or nothing, which is normal mode, now in visual mode, if I do my motions, I can move around and it'll highlight that text. And I can do some kind of operation on that. So I'm going to demo a lot of things with this, but I would like to say that it is a little bit of an anti-pattern to visually select things first and then do an operation. Because that's kind of the old style of thinking, is that if I want to change a block of text, I have to highlight it and then do a change on it. So you can do that. So if I visually select inside the quotes, I've now visually selected that, and then I can do my change operation, and I can do something like that. But really, if I know what I want to change, I can just change that thing directly. But I think maybe for a screen share, this is useful to be able to just visualize what is being selected, what is being acted on. So if I'm back here in my experimental, if I VW, that will select the word. If I VIW, that will select inside the word. VI quote. And if you are in visual mode, you don't actually have, if you stay in it, you can just keep giving these commands. So I can also do a quote to go around the quotes, or a brackets to go around the brackets. A P will then go around the next paragraph. If I VIP, this will select all of the contiguous text. So this idea of a paragraph is potentially more useful in some languages than others. So if you're using C-style languages, so you have your JavaScript where you have parens and curly brackets everywhere, those may be more useful things to operate within. But if you're in something like Python, where white space is important, the paragraphs can be a useful way to operate. So any questions about how motions and actions can work together?
The visual mode was a little bit weird. I was trying to kind of follow along. So if I hit V to do something, then if I try to type out, oh, never mind. Okay, I see. It like kind of starts me wherever my cursor is.
Yeah. So
I figured it out. Sorry.
Yeah. So yeah, visual mode is a separate mode from everything else. So it's not insert mode. It's not normal mode. And there is one other mode, command line mode, which I'll go into. So if you do V, you can do your W's and you can select things and go back and D to delete. So that's if you just do lowercase v. Like I mentioned before, if you uppercase things, that's like really going for it with with the V. So capital V will select the whole line. So you can operate line-wise on things. So if I'm just going up and down, the curly braces jump you across blocks of white space. So if you want to select a few blocks of white space, I find that's a convenient way to do that. And then another way that you can get into visual mode is if you do Control V, that brings you into visual block mode, where you can now select blocks of text. So rather than lowercase v by itself, which kind of operates line-wise as you might expect other selections to, visual block mode lets you select blocks of text, and then you can delete those or change them to something else. So if things are vertically aligned in that way, you can do that. Sometimes I go and if I have just a range of things that I want to do something to, you could potentially just comment those all out at one time. So there are plugins that do that kind of thing better. So Vim Commentary is one of those, and I'll try to talk a little bit about some plugins in a little bit. But yeah, visual mode can be helpful, but it's often better to just apply your action directly if you know what kind of motion or text object would apply to it. So we'll come down in here. So for example, if I don't want it to just inherit from exception, I can change in Word to do something with that, or I can change inside the parens, which does the same thing. If I had a second argument, this makes it a little bit clearer. So I can delete capital W will delete the whole word, or delete inside the parens. So visually, you could do the same thing. You could select them and then delete, but then that it does restrict you in how you can replay that action. Because if I'm up here, if I DW just to delete a word, I can go on to the next one and I can delete those words. If I visually selected first and then deleted, it is inconsistent because that now thinks, well, I'm going to just delete that number of characters. I selected however many characters experimental is, so I'm just going to delete that many, as opposed to knowing, okay, well, this is a logical unit. This is a word, so I should be deleting inside the word. But visual mode can be very useful. Yep.
Sorry. Did I hear you say before something about block selection? Did I?
Yes.
Or maybe I.
Yep.
So like if you wanted to select on lines 61 through 63, there was all of the tensor flows. If you wanted to replace all of those at the same time, there was a way to do that, you were saying?
Yep. So with visual block mode, that's Control V. So now rather than highlighting line-wise, it now selects a block of text. You can use all your normal actions that you want to do. So if I want to go down 2, I can either do JJ to go down 2, or I could do a lot of things you can prefix with a number. So I can say 2J to go down 2 lines, and then E will go to the end of the word. So now I've highlighted all of all of the block that I want to change. And so then I can do that. Something.
What was the command again to get to visual block?
Control V. So Control V can be very useful in cases like this where you have things that are vertically aligned and you want to operate on those. There are also plugins that help you do this. So there's one called Multiple Cursors, which lets you, if I'm on a word, I can just do Control N to now find instances of that word, and this will continue on down here. And so now I can change that all in one go. So yeah, the only problem with that is the undo is a little wonky. So the other super powerful thing with Vim is that you have a command line mode. So this kind of bridges back to where we were with X, where you don't necessarily want to do all of your editing blind, just operating on what line numbers you have or whatever. But inside Vim, you can do some really nice things. For example, if I wanted to substitute every instance of TensorFlow, well, one, let's just start on the current line. So I think if anybody has ever been in Vim and then figured out how to get out of Vim, the colon operator was probably your key to that. So the colon will bring up the command line menu. So you can start typing in commands in here. If you just type a command, so for example, quit is how you would quit. So we can go back in. A lot of commands are abbreviated because in Vim we want to be lazy and conserve our keystrokes. So that often just gets substituted with Q to quit, and we can quit again out of that. But then there are also a lot of things that we can do where we can just operate on lines of text. So so also with my screen key, you can see that I type a semicolon and that brings me into this menu. That's because I've configured things so that I don't have to hit Shift to get there, because again, laziness. So I'll see if I can get to the vimrc, which is how you configure everything, but you really want to make Vim your own. So sitting down at somebody else's Vim might be a little bit difficult because they'll have things all rebound to how they want it. So these are all, I've been trying to use default key bindings for everything, or for most things. But I can show you where I have in my vimrc customized things. But if you were to open Vim, just a vanilla version of Vim, you'd want to type colon to open up your command line menu. And so now we can enter some commands. And this is probably more on the intermediate side. But if you're familiar with sed or grep, I think a lot of the concepts will probably be similar. And in fact, grep itself comes from ed, the editor, which we're now several generations down from, but the same things apply. So if anybody doesn't know, grep stands for globally find a regular expression and print it. And so if I were to run this, it would find everything that has an RE in it. It'll find that, and it'll print it everywhere in this file. So that's where grep comes from. Sed is a stream editor, which also is related to ed, the editor. But a lot of the substitution principles are the same in Vim as they are in sed. So if I wanted to do something like replace every instance of TensorFlow with something else, I could do my multiple cursors thing and go through all of that and find all of them and do my operation there. You probably wouldn't do that in your normal editor. You'd probably do a find and replace. Vim has that built in, and it has regular expressions built into it, which I think already surpasses a lot of the other editors out there. So we can substitute TensorFlow with whatever else we want. So technically, this will only do the first occurrence on each line. If we wanted to make sure that it does every occurrence on every line, we just throw a G on the end for global. And so now we no longer have TensorFlow in our document. We've substituted all of that out with ASDF. But again, for laziness, if I don't want to have to type TensorFlow, so let's say so if there's some variable that I want to operate on, if I hit the asterisk on it, so TensorFlow is a standalone word, that will then search for that word throughout the document. So whatever is under your cursor, it'll search for that. And then N will go to the next one. P will go to the previous one. And I think that was probably a mistake on my part. But this is perfect for demo purposes. So you can see that asterisk now highlights all of those TensorFlows. Much like how Vim stores previous actions, Vim also stores previous searches. So if I were to now go back in and do my substitute, I no longer have to type TensorFlow. I can just leave the search area blank and then type in my replacement. And so here, I'm just operating on the one line. If I go and I type %s, this says in the whole file, now substitute ASDF for TensorFlow. And so now everywhere TensorFlow exists, it'll get substituted. And I didn't actually have to go in and type TensorFlow. If I want to do the same thing with config info line, if I do asterisk on that, if I want to substitute this out for some other function, like if I just want to do, so if I want to rename it up here, I can say, we'll just call it config line. And now that changes it throughout my document without me having to go and go through some menu to refactor or even type in the word that I want to search for. They can just do that.
I think I missed how you initially selected the word. Did you go through visual mode to do that?
Nope. So that's if you do the asterisk key. Whatever is under whatever's under your cursor gets automatically selected. You can also do the same thing if you search. So if I want to look for Basil RC, I can, I guess I didn't mention this either. So the / is the search function. So if I look for Basil RC, then N will bring me through the different occurrences of that. And that is now stored in my search register. So I can substitute and leave the substitute part blank and say, I want to do Basil RC and substitute that.
Okay, so my asterisk was doing something where it was like hopping me to the next instance of that word, not selecting.
So it does both. So asterisk, if I'm on, so maybe it's easier to see up here. So if I'm on 1596 on config line, if I hit my asterisk, it'll bring me to the next instance of that. So I'm on 1599 because it searched for the next instance of that object. The # does that in reverse. So if I want to search backwards, I can do that. So asterisk will search for what's under the cursor going forward. And then you can either keep hitting asterisk or lowercase n will bring you to the next one, capital N will bring you to the one before it. But that is now, like a secondary effect of that is that it's now stored in our search register. So I can operate on those things without having to manually type that in. So here, I'm now going to I'm going to go out and come back in because I want to start with a fresh version. But I think one powerful thing that we can show here, we can now start to combine some of these substitutions and filtering operations. So let's say, so there's TensorFlow Lite that's being mentioned in here. Let's say you're doing development and you have a light version and you have a full version, and you want to switch over to the TensorFlow full version. but you don't necessarily want to just replace every instance of light. And you also don't necessarily want to have to, so yeah, you don't want to do every instance of light, and you only want to do it when it matches with TensorFlow. We can do something like combine it with the G command. So much like I did before, G, so this is now a regular expression. If I look for TensorFlow and then anything and then light, I can then substitute light with full. And so now that has gone, and you can see 5 substitutions on 5 lines. Everywhere that matched TensorFlow with light, I then substituted light out with something else. So this is something that even if your editor does have some kind of regular expression search and replace, I don't know of any others that have this kind of filtering operation, which let you go and say, substitute light, but only if this other word occurs somewhere on the line. Or like going in the reverse direction, I could say anything that has light, I now want to substitute TensorFlow with some other package. And so now it doesn't matter where light is on the line. Light could come before, light could come after. Just any line that has light is what I'm operating on. And then I can add on another layer of commands onto that. So that's G is to match anything that has that pattern. V is the opposite of that. So V will match the opposite of that pattern. So if I wanted to substitute, if I wanted to get rid of TensorFlow everywhere other than where light is mentioned, I could do V light. So this is now saying anywhere light is not mentioned, now do this thing. So I could substitute tensor with, we'll do vector flow. So now instead of being TensorFlow, this is now vector flow everywhere other than where I'm referencing that light package. So yes, there are some things to memorize, like G is to globally find something, and V is to find the inverse. And the S command will substitute. But you can now start to really build out some very powerful types of actions that you want to do just by combining some of these in interesting ways.
Those are things I'm familiar with from other tools too, so it's not totally out there.
Okay. So I know Michael wanted to hear about NerdTree. So I think maybe I'll do just a little bit on NerdTree, a little bit on Control P. So NerdTree is a way of visually navigating through your files. If you want to use your mouse, you can use your mouse to do things. I think it's probably better not to use the mouse, just for myself, my preferences, but you can do things with your mouse in here. NerdTree has help built right into it. So you can see at the top it says press question mark for help. So if we do that, then now you can use all of your Vim keys to go and read through the actions that you can do. One of the things I've done here is I've bound toggling that NerdTree open to space n in my vimrc file. Because if you are using certain functions or certain packages a lot, then you probably want to bind them to things that are easy for you to get to. So space n will open NerdTree. You can bookmark things in here. So if I wanted to bookmark that tools package, I've bound that to space B, but you can also just do : bookmark, and that'll bookmark it. So your bookmarks are up here. So if you do capital B, that'll jump you to your bookmarks. So hitting enter on there, we can now jump into our bookmarked directory. most of the commands that you can do, so if you're doing some kind of, there's a whole other layer of things that I wanted to get to, but I don't think we're going to have the time. Vim integrates insanely well with your operating system. So you can call any command from command mode in Vim. So if I want to look at the directory listing, if I type : to get into command line mode and then bang ls, that will list my files out here. You can also read things in directly. So R is for read, and then bang ls will take the output of that command and read it into your file. Those, by default, the current working directory is wherever you opened Vim. You can change that via nerdtree. So if you cd with nerdtree, that will then change your working directory. So now if I were to ls inside here, that gives me the directory listing of whatever directory I'm in currently. So another thing that you might want to do is be able to search for files. So normally with Vim, you can, if you go into edit command line mode, you can E for edit, and then this will let you edit files that are in your directory. Or if we wanted to go to converters, it has tab complete, but still that's not necessarily anything fancy. Control P is a fuzzy matching system. So if I wanted to look for Python files that are in my directory tree, it does a fuzzy matching to find those. So if I want to look for the compat template, I can then have my fuzzy finding up here, and then I can just jump to that. I believe, so I'm not an expert on nerdtree, but I believe that they work together pretty well. So if you set the working directory in nerdtree, I think Control P knows to prefer that directory to look in.
Hey.
Yep.
Did I miss something? Did you say that you had like your vimrc file set up to where you could like use a specific keystroke in order to open nerdtree? Like.
Yes. So
what if you don't have that? Like, what's the default?
So the default is if you go into command mode and you go to nerdtree. So you type in nerdtree. I don't think it's bound to anything by default. I think in the README on the GitHub page, it recommends binding it to Control N. But if you run that, that should open nerdtree. So this is a plugin, so you do also have to have it installed. That does just involve. Yeah, so the GitHub pages should all have very clear explanations on how to install things. Now, if you're on Vim version 8, it's very easy. You just clone the repo into one particular directory, which I believe is .vim/pack/start. So I'm using an old bundle. So I'm using an older way of doing it. So I use Vim pathogen in order to do my package management. But I'm pretty sure with Vim 8, you can just drop it into .vim/pack/start. So I think if you put things in here, that will then just load them in the next time you start your Vim. So this is, I guess I can do a quick tour of some of the things in my vimrc file. So I guess my overall great recommendation would be look for Tim Pope's plugins on GitHub, because Tim Pope has just everything useful. All the plugins that I love are basically Tim Pope's plugins. So pathogen infect is one of his, which I think is now no longer strictly needed, but he does offer a lot of really useful things, like Vim surround. He does have a nice Git wrapper for Vim. And then Vim Sensible is one that I would recommend that sets some quote unquote sensible defaults in Vim. So like the incremental search and search highlighting, I think a lot of that comes from Vim Sensible. So I can send a, yeah, so that is built in, but I think, so you can turn line numbers off. If you do set NU, or if you do spell it out, you can do set number. That will again give you line numbers. Set relative number will give you relative numbering if that's your thing. But Vim does not necessarily do those things by default. So Vim Sensible will set you up to be, I think, just at a nice starting point. I'm going to turn relative numbering off for now. Yeah, so I probably won't dig too deep into those things above, but these are some things that I set up. So for nerd tree, Vim has the idea of a leader key. So I've mapped my leader key to space, so that if I hit the space bar, I can then map that to other commands. So it's kind of like a namespacing for Vim, rather than potentially colliding with other key bindings that are already there. The leader key should be for your specific bindings. So if I search for something and it's highlighted, I can do space H to get rid of the highlighting, which just basically runs the no highlighting command. Space N will toggle nerd tree on and off, and then space B will bookmark a directory for me. So this is what can let you really tweak your Vim how you want it. And then over here, these V no remaps and N no remaps. This is for visual mode and for normal mode. I'm mapping keystrokes to a certain function, or to a certain activity. So this is entering command mode and then calling this and then hitting enter. So the N no remap is for normal mode. If I were to take this out, then I wouldn't be able to do these things in normal mode. Same thing with visual mode. So this allows you to have different behaviors between normal mode and visual mode. So sometimes, for example, if you have text highlighted in visual mode, you might want to operate on those differently than you do if you're just in normal mode. So this allows you the ability to customize your key bindings to specific modes that you're in. You can also have for insert mode. So I believe I have, yeah, up here. So I have insert mode, no remap, JK. So here, as I mentioned before, if you're in insert mode, you can hit escape to get out of insert mode. What this does is if I hit JK, since they're right next to each other, and it's basically a no op if I'm in normal mode, that will get me out of insert mode, and it won't end up typing the J. The only downside of that is that if I type a J, there's a little slight delay with how it prints things. So you can see the cursor doesn't advance right away, whereas if I do other things, it does. But if I go on and I type some other character, then it goes on immediately. So I don't consider it to be a net negative. But so this lets you remap basically any key or any key combination in any mode to anything you want. So you can really tweak it and make it your own. Oh, another thing which is also useful to know, if you haven't written anything, so writing to disk is W, so :W will save your file. If I don't necessarily want to save my file and I just want to keep going, it'll complain if I try to quit or if I try to edit something else. If you give it the exclamation point, if you just add the bang, then it'll force it to do that thing. So I'm just going to edit without saving this. And I'm going to go to my Vim directory. So you can also just open directories directly in Vim. Since I have NerdTree installed, this then defaulted to going into NerdTree. So rather than opening up as the sidebar, I can just go and browse the directory directly. So yes, just a quick, some recommendations in here. Vim Sensible, I think, is a good start, a good baseline for people just to get the baseline behavior that you would like. So line numbers, incremental search. Vim can do snippets. Vim Surround is excellent with changing delimiters and working with delimiters. Multiple cursors is something that some people might want. I don't necessarily use it as often. Vim Fugitive is the Git key bindings. Vim Exchange, so Vim Commentary and Vim Exchange are probably the two that I also use the most. So rather than having to go to the beginning of the line and put in your comment, you can GC is the prefix for commenting something out. And this also takes all of the other motions that we would want to do before. Motions are text objects. So I can comment out. So GC is to comment. Inside the paragraph will come out the whole paragraph. If we were back in TensorFlow over here, I'm just going to find why. Yeah. I'm just going to find some good. So I can comment out the whole paragraph. You can comment down a couple lines. So rather than selecting what you want and then having to do your key bindings, again, just this idea of being able to know what action you want to do and then apply that to whatever motion or object you want. So that's Vim Commentary helps you do that. Vim Surround, so watch the square brackets here. I can change the surrounding from square bracket to, for example, if I want to change it to parens. So in Python, square brackets are for a list, and parentheses are for a tuple, and curly braces are for sets or dictionaries. So if you wanted to change from one type of thing to another, rather than having to go and delete the previous delimiters that you had before and add in your new ones, you can just say, hey, I want to change my curly brackets or square brackets to parens. And that just happens. So that's Vim Surround. And then Vim Exchange, I think, is a super cool one. So we can say, I want to exchange everything inside the parens. And then same thing down here. If I just want to swap those, I can now just switch one thing for the other. So that can, and they don't have to be the same thing. I just use the dot to be able to repeat that. But I can exchange inside the word to select the word, and then I can come in here and say I want to change inside. Oh, I guess that. I'll do this one. Change inside the word and change inside the quotes. And so then I can put everything from that previous word inside the quotes and swap that out. So if you want to change the order of your arguments to a function, that's a convenient way of doing it. Rather than deleting things or trying to move things around, you can just, again, there's this idea of there's a thing that you want to do, and then just doing that directly rather than, well, I need to switch these things, so then I have to cut them and move them and paste them and then copy this one and put it back in the other place. So that's just a quick overview about some, I think, very useful plugins.
I like what you said about being able to kind of do the kind of things like that align with the way you're thinking about it. So like I don't think change this bracket to that bracket. I think like change this from a map to a dictionary or whatever. Or I want to exchange these two words. Like it's nice that it kind of maps to the task I'm doing better than the actual like typing involved.
Yeah, so I think once you get the vocabulary in your head, at least how I think, Vim kind of maps onto that. Like I want to delete everything that's inside the parens, or I want to change what's inside the quotes, or I mean, another thing which I didn't talk about is T and F. So I think in the interest of time, I'll probably wrap down soon, very soon. But T and F are also very useful ones. And also, I mentioned before the search, / for search. All of these things can be used as the motions. So if I want to delete to something that can't be easily expressed as a word or inside the quotes. So for example, if I wanted to delete from here up until the close paren, or if I wanted to change it, I can see T will change to whatever character I give it. Now I've changed to the close paren. Or if I want to do something even more and I want to say from up here, I want to change up until the except, I can change and then search for except. Now that'll change everything between me and the except. And I can type in there. So that search feature not only allows you to jump around and go to things, but it allows you to do things up until that point also. So T does to, F does through, I don't know. So DT period will delete up until the period. DF period will delete up everything through the period. And then D/ I could do up through path, for example. So I want to delete everything up until that search term. So I think the homework assignments will just be learn some about the actual actions that you can do. So I didn't go into nearly everything, but like deleting and changing, Y is yank, equals is for indentation. So if you have some JavaScript code that's inconsistently indented and you just want to format that, equals is the indenting action. So you can indent the whole file, or you can indent inside your curly brackets. But I think that kind of composability between those different, like the nouns and the verbs, is a really powerful thing in Vim. So I know that was a lot and not terribly well organized. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to try to clear some things up now if people want. Otherwise, I'm happy to let people go because I know we've gone like an hour and a quarter, and this is probably a lot of information. So any questions or anything that I missed that you need to know right now?
I thought it was great. I wrote down like I think 15 new like very specific things that I can kind of add, and then just a bunch of like kind of principles and things, and some holes that I've been missing in my understanding of it, which is just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that what I never realized was the chaining of the commands, like what you were showing from the beginning. So there were a lot of these commands, like I knew individually that like I would just one-off it, right? But now you're talking about chaining them all together. I'm like, whoa, so much better.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and there are macros. You can record macros, and you can play those back on individual lines. So yeah. I guess just to piggyback on that, I'll throw you one more thing that you then might find interesting if you like that combining of things. So there's that idea, G will find something. So you can find lines or find the inverse of the lines if you do V. So we can find lines. Let's say we want to find anywhere where there's TensorFlow. I can then say in normal mode, do something. So I can say in normal mode, insert at the beginning of the line a quotation mark, and then escape out of that, and then append at the end of the line another quotation mark. And so now what this has done is it's gone and basically quoted everything that mentions TensorFlow, which is probably not something that you would necessarily want to do with TensorFlow, but you could imagine running a macro on every line that has some kind of key term. So yeah, the sky is the limit with how you can mix and match these things. And U is undo, cool, which is a very useful command.
Saw that a lot today.
Yes. Because I don't actually want to change anything in TensorFlow. Not replacing it with ASDF. Yeah. I think that would get me banned from open source.
Where can we find you on Twitter?
I'm at Zingbertson on Twitter. I don't know if I've posted anything in the last 3 years. I am on Mastodon at Zingbertson at linuxrocks.online, I think it is. You can find me on the Coding Block Slack channel. I'm something on there. Probably Zach at Zach Ingbertson. Mastodon or Slack are probably the best ways to find me right now. But yeah, thank you all for your attention and for your questions. If there's any interest in doing another one, there's a ton more about Vim that we can talk about. And maybe I can just talk about one thing, like macros, and do a deep dive into that if people are interested. But yeah, I'll let you all go now, and I'll try to clean this up and post this on YouTube and/or PeerTube at some point in the future, which is the open source version of YouTube.
Fantastic. Well, I really appreciate it. I learned a ton.
Well, it's my pleasure.
Thanks a lot for putting this together.
Always happy to talk about Vim or Git or Emacs, actually. So my dirty little secret is that I don't actually use Vim as my daily driver. I use Spacemacs in Emacs, which is basically Vim inside Emacs, which is crazy powerful. So yeah, one of the crazy things about Vim is that it appears everywhere. You have Vim key bindings in Visual Studio Code. Now you can get extensions for it, or in Sublime. Gmail has Vim key bindings. There's now Vim in Emacs. So I think these are also just useful things to know, regardless of what actual editor or IDE you want to use, because you can probably get a really decent portion of the Vim functionality inside whatever program you already use. So if anybody wants to talk about Spacemacs, I'm also happy to do that. But I guess for now, thank you, everyone, and have a good afternoon or evening or morning, wherever in the world you are.
All right, thank you.